Hello everyone. Tonight we explore the story of a man who rose from the blood-soaked sands of Judea to the marble throne of Rome itself, Titus. Loved by his people, yet haunted by the shadows of war, he was the conqueror of Jerusalem, the builder of the Colosseum, and the emperor whose reign burned bright, but far too short. In just over 2 years, he faced plague, fire, and whispers of betrayal from those closest to him. Was his sudden death the hand of fate, or the final strike of an enemy within? Stay with us as we uncover the triumphs, tragedies, and secrets of the man Rome called the darling of mankind. Titus Flavius Vespasianus was born on December 30th, 39 CE in the bustling quarters of Rome under the reign of Emperor Caligula. His family belonged to the newly rising Flavian dynasty, though at his birth it was far from certain they would ever touch the imperial throne. His father, Vespasian, was a seasoned military officer of equestrian stock, while his mother, Domitilla the Elder, descended from a prosperous family in Rhaete. The young Titus entered a Rome that was glittering yet unstable, an empire whose rulers often fell to intrigue and violence. Titus's early childhood was shaped by the contrast between privilege and discipline. While his family enjoyed a measure of wealth, Vespasian's military duties often kept him far from home, leaving Domitilla to instill a strong moral code in her children. Rome's streets were both a playground and a classroom for the boy, where he absorbed the pageantry of imperial life and the harsh realities of urban unrest. These impressions would form the backbone of his understanding of power's fragility. From the beginning, Titus was marked by his striking appearance, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, and possessing an easy charisma that drew the attention of both peers and elders. His education began early, guided by private tutors skilled in rhetoric, literature, and the histories of Rome and Greece. The Flavians valued practicality as much as refinement, and Titus was taught to balance intellectual pursuits with the martial skills that would one day define him. By adolescence, he was already proficient in the art of oratory, delivering speeches with a confidence rare for his age. His grasp of military history impressed his tutors, and his fascination with Alexander the Great hinted at a growing ambition. Rome at this time was ruled by emperors whose authority often depended on the sword, and Titus seemed destined to follow in that path. Yet his father's cautionary words often reminded him of the perils that came with imperial favour. In his teenage years, Titus began accompanying his father to social gatherings attended by senators, generals, and foreign envoys. These experiences gave him a glimpse of Rome's political machinery, its alliances, its betrayals, and the subtle dance of influence that kept the empire's vast territories in line. Titus learned to read a man's intentions from his tone, posture, and choice of words, an ability that would later serve him well both on the battlefield and in the Senate. The death of his mother when he was still young left a deep mark on Titus. Domitilla's absence created a void that his father's military discipline could not fill. The loss hardened him, sharpening his resolve to make his family's name immortal in Rome's annals. The household became a more austere place, and the young Titus began to channel his emotions into relentless study and physical training. As the political climate shifted with the rise and fall of emperors like Claudius and Nero, Titus matured in a Rome that could turn dangerous for the ambitious. He witnessed firsthand how quickly fortunes could reverse, and learned the necessity of patience and loyalty in navigating the treacherous waters of imperial politics. These lessons, seared into him during formative years, would guide his conduct for the rest of his life. Titus also developed a taste for the arts and entertainment of Rome. He was an accomplished singer and poet, skills that allowed him to charm both the elite and the common people. This balance of martial readiness and cultural grace made him stand out in a city where few could excel equally in both arenas. Friends and rivals alike began to see him as a man of unusual promise. In his late teens, Titus forged a friendship with Britannicus, the son of Emperor Claudius, which would draw him into the very heart of palace intrigues. The bond between the two was genuine yet dangerous, as it attracted the suspicion of Emperor Nero. When Britannicus died suddenly, Titus learned a brutal truth. In Rome, even friendship could be fatal. This sobering moment marked the end of his youth. By the time he entered early adulthood, Titus was no longer just the promising son of a military commander. He was a man shaped by loss, ambition, and a keen awareness of the precarious nature of power. The stage was set for his entry into the military, where the empire's fortunes and his own would be tested in blood and fire. Titus's entry into the Roman military was both a rite of passage and a calculated move by his father, who understood that true influence in the empire flowed from martial success. His first assignments were modest, serving as a military tribune in Germania and later in Britannia. These distant postings tested his endurance and discipline, exposing him to harsh climates and unfamiliar cultures. He proved adept at earning the respect of both legionaries and local allies, learning that loyalty was forged through shared hardship, not mere rank. The young officer displayed a rare mix of bravery and strategic sense. He was quick to grasp the nuances of supply lines, fortification planning, and the importance of morale in maintaining a fighting force. His men respected his willingness to face the same dangers they endured, whether trudging through winter mud or facing sudden skirmishes. Each campaign hardened his body and sharpened his mind, preparing him for the greater trials to come. By the mid-60s CE, the empire was entering a turbulent phase. In Judea, tensions between Rome and the Jewish population were escalating into open revolt. Nero, desperate for a decisive military victory to shore up his faltering rule, dispatched Vespasian to quell the uprising. Titus was given command of a legion under his father, marking the first time the two would fight side by side in a major conflict. It was a rare opportunity for a young commander to make his name in history. The Jewish war would become the defining crucible of Titus's career. The campaign was brutal and unrelenting, fought across fortified cities and rugged hills. Titus demonstrated exceptional siegecraft, mastering the use of battering rams, siege towers, and coordinated assaults. His attention to discipline and precision reduced Roman casualties, though the war's savagery spared neither soldier nor civilian. The lessons he learned here would later inform his rule as emperor. During the siege of Jotapata in 67 CE, Titus's determination was tested to its limits. The city's defenders resisted fiercely, but the Romans eventually breached the walls. The victory was bloody, and the aftermath left a trail of devastation. It was here that Titus reportedly first crossed paths with Josephus, the Jewish commander who would later become Rome's chronicler of the conflict. The meeting was a reminder that even amid war, political calculations never ceased. As the campaign dragged on, the revolt's spiritual and symbolic heart shifted to Jerusalem. The city's formidable fortifications and its significance to the Jewish people meant that its fall would send a powerful message. Titus's role in the siege was central. While Vespasian oversaw the broader strategy, Titus managed the relentless assaults that would eventually break the city's defences. Each step forward was paid for in Roman blood. In 69 CE, Rome itself was thrown into chaos with the Year of the Four Emperors. As civil war erupted in the capital, Vespasian was declared emperor by his troops. Titus, still in Judea, suddenly found himself not just a general's son, but heir to the imperial throne. The siege of Jerusalem was no longer only about military victory, it was also a proving ground for the man destined to inherit the empire. By the summer of 70 CE, Jerusalem fell. The temple was destroyed, a loss that would echo through centuries. Titus led the triumphal procession in Rome, parading the spoils and captives. It was a moment of unmatched prestige, but also of moral complexity. While celebrated as a hero in Rome, he was remembered as a destroyer in Judea. His reputation as both conqueror and administrator was now firmly established. In the aftermath, Titus was appointed commander of the Praetorian Guard, a position of immense political leverage. It was a move that consolidated the Flavian grip on power, ensuring a stable succession when Vespasian's reign ended. For Titus, however, it was also a reminder that Rome's greatest battles were often fought in the marble corridors of the Palatine, as much as on distant fields. Yet beneath his growing fame, whispers persisted, rumours of ambition, of a man eager for the purple robe. For now, he remained loyal to his father, but the world around him was changing fast, and with it, the path toward an imperial destiny he could neither refuse nor fully control. As Praetorian prefect, Titus stood at the centre of Rome's political heart, commanding the emperor's personal guard and acting as Vespasian's right hand. The role was a double-edged sword. It offered unrivaled influence, but also placed him under constant scrutiny from senators, generals, and ambitious courtiers. Titus embraced the position with calculated precision, overseeing the guard's discipline and ensuring their loyalty lay firmly with the Flavian dynasty. His closeness to Vespasian was both a strength and a liability. To the Roman populace, father and son symbolized stability after the chaos of 69 CE. To his rivals, however, their unity represented a concentration of power that threatened the delicate balance of the Senate. Titus countered such suspicions with public displays of modesty, declining excessive honors and emphasizing his role as servant to the emperor rather than successor in waiting. Despite his efforts, whispers about his ambitions persisted, fueled by his commanding presence and proven military record. His relationship with Berenice, the Jewish princess who had accompanied him from the east, further stirred controversy. To many Romans, a foreign consort, especially one from recently conquered Judea, was politically dangerous. Though deeply attached to her, Titus understood that their bond risked undermining his future reign. Titus's ability to manage both military and political spheres became increasingly evident. He reformed the guard's structure, rooting out corruption and replacing unreliable officers with veterans who had served under him in Judea. This not only secured his personal authority, but also ensured that, in the event of sudden unrest, he could act decisively without hesitation from his troops. In the Senate, Titus played the role of mediator, often smoothing tensions between Vespasian's policies and the old patrician elite. He mastered the art of subtle persuasion, couching imperial directives in language that allowed senators to feel respected while still yielding to Flavian priorities. This political dexterity would prove invaluable when he eventually inherited the purple. The years in Rome were not without challenges. Grain shortages threatened unrest in the city, and rumours of provincial revolts required swift responses. Titus coordinated with governors to stabilise supply lines, ensuring the capital remained fed and content. His ability to address logistical crises without resorting to heavy-handed repression earned him grudging respect from both plebeians and patricians. Still, not all matters could be resolved without sacrifice. The decision to end his relationship with Berenice was a personal blow. Yielding to public opinion, he sent her away, a move that reinforced his image as a ruler who placed Rome's stability above his own happiness. The separation, however, left a lingering melancholy that would shadow him for years. By the late 70s CE, the Flavian dynasty stood secure. Vespasian's rule brought economic recovery, major building projects, and a sense of restored order. In this climate, Titus's reputation as a competent and loyal heir solidified. Yet those who knew him best sensed an undercurrent of restlessness, an awareness that his destiny was approaching, and with it, the weight of the empire's burdens. When Vespasian's health began to decline, the transition of power loomed closer. Titus prepared quietly, consolidating alliances and ensuring that no rival faction could disrupt the succession. His years in the Praetorian Guard had taught him that the moment of an emperor's death was the most dangerous in Rome's political life. He would be ready when that day came. The empire's eyes were on him, and his own gaze was fixed on the Palatine throne. Titus was no longer mere the emperor's son. He was the shadow of the next age, waiting for the sun to rise on his reign. In June of 79 CE, the inevitable came to pass. Vespasian died at Aquae Cutiliae after a sudden illness. The succession was peaceful, a testament to the years of careful preparation by both father and son. Titus ascended the throne without bloodshed, the first Roman emperor to follow his biological father in a direct hereditary line. Yet the moment was bittersweet. The man who had been his mentor and shield was gone, and the mantle of empire now rested solely on his shoulders. Titus's first acts as emperor were deliberate and symbolic. He pledged to uphold his father's policies, ensuring continuity in the eyes of both the Senate and the people. He confirmed the positions of trusted officials, avoided purges, and made a point of attending public games and festivals, presenting himself as an accessible ruler. These gestures reassured a populace still wary after the violent transitions of recent decades. One of his earliest challenges was managing Rome's relationship with the provinces. Having commanded legions and governed in the east, Titus understood the importance of maintaining loyalty beyond Italy. He granted favours to provincial elites, confirmed local privileges, and emphasised fair taxation. His ability to combine firmness with diplomacy won him the respect of governors and reduced the likelihood of rebellion. Despite his firm start, critics remained watchful. Some expected him to fall into the traps of indulgence or cruelty, as had previous emperors. Aware of these suspicions, Titus made a public display of virtue, refusing to order executions without due process and curbing extravagance in the imperial household. This earned him a reputation for clemency that contrasted sharply with the harsher policies of past rulers. His reign also brought a renewed focus on public works. Continuing his father's vision, Titus oversaw the completion of the Colosseum in Auge, rating it with grand games that lasted for 100 days. Exotic animals, gladiatorial combats, and elaborate naval battles filled the arena, reinforcing the image of Rome as the centre of the world. The spectacle bound the people to their emperor through awe and entertainment. The summer of 79 CE, however, would shatter the calm of his early rule. Far to the south, Mount Vesuvius erupted, burying Pompeii, Herculaneum, and surrounding towns under ash and pumice. News of the disaster reached Rome slowly, but when the scale became clear, Titus acted decisively. He dispatched aid, sent officials to oversee relief efforts, and personally contributed funds for reconstruction. His swift compassion endeared him to survivors and strengthened his moral authority. In the months that followed, another crisis struck. Rome itself was ravaged by a massive fire. The damage was extensive, and rebuilding efforts strained the imperial treasury. Yet again, Titus mobilized resources, providing shelter for the displaced and ensuring that repairs were completed quickly. His visible leadership in these disasters solidified his image as a protector of the people. Even with such challenges, Titus maintained a personal charm that disarmed potential rivals. He dined with senators, attended public ceremonies, and granted audiences freely. His approach was in stark contrast to emperors who had hidden behind palace walls, and it generated a loyalty that went beyond mere political necessity. By the end of his first year, Rome's citizens had begun to speak of Titus as the delight of mankind, a title rare in the annals of imperial history. He seemed to embody the ideal of a just and compassionate ruler, capable of strength without cruelty and authority without tyranny. The promise of his reign appeared boundless, yet fate would not grant him the time to fulfill it. Shadows gathered on the hoary. Zon, and the man who had faced fire, stone, and war, would soon confront an enemy no power could vanquish. The second year of Titus's reign began with optimism. The empire had weathered disaster, and the young emperor's popularity was unmatched. His handling of the Vesuvius catastrophe and the Roman fire had cemented an image of benevolence and decisiveness. Yet beneath the public acclaim, tensions lingered. The imperial court remained a nest of intrigue, where alliances shifted with the winds and ambition was never far from the surface. Titus's greatest strength, his personal accessibility, also exposed him to danger. Senators and generals saw more of him than they had of previous rulers, granting them opportunities to influence policy or test his resolve. Some used flattery, others relied on subtle reminders of the military power they commanded. Titus managed these competing forces with the skill of a man who had spent years navigating Rome's treacherous political waters. In the provinces, Rome's legions continued to enforce order, though small uprisings flared at the empire's fringes. In Britannia, a series of raids required reinforcements, while in Dacia and along the Danube, tensions with tribal confederations demanded careful diplomacy. Titus delegated much of this work to experienced generals, understanding that his presence was more urgently required in Rome. Foreign policy also brought him into contact with client kings and allied rulers. He renewed treaties with Parthia and maintained Rome's dominant influence in Armenia, ensuring stability along the empire's eastern borders. His experience in Judea gave him a rare sensitivity to the politics of the East, enabling him to balance firmness with respect for local traditions. In 80 CE, he hosted one of the most elaborate spectacles Rome had ever seen to celebrate the Colosseum's full dedication. The games ran for months, featuring exotic beasts, staged sea battles, and the execution of criminals for public entita. While some criticized the expense, most citizens saw it as proof of Rome's grandeur under a generous ruler. The events reinforced the bond between emperor and people, yet nature seemed determined to challenge his reign. That same year, a devastating plague swept through Rome. Illness claimed thousands, striking rich and poor alike. Titus once again opened the imperial treasury, funding medical aid and burial services. His visible compassion during the epidemic deepened the public's affection for him, even as the crisis drained the empire's resources. Amid these trials, his personal relationships remained a subject of speculation. Though he never married during his reign, rumours of private liaisons persisted, along with whispers that he still carried a torch for Berenice. If such feelings remained, they were locked behind a disciplined public image, for Titus understood that imperial favour could never appear beholden to foreign influence. In dealing with the Senate, Titus continued his father's policy of cooperation. He encouraged debate, refrained from treason trials, and invited senators to share in ceremonial duties. This approach disarmed many potential opponents, though some still viewed his clemency as a sign of weakness rather than calculated wisdom. By mid-81 CE, Titus had secured the loyalty of the legions, the goodwill of the people, and a measure of harmony with the Senate. His reign, though short, had already weathered challenges that might have destroyed lesser emperors. The foundations for a lasting dynasty appeared firm, but destiny had its own designs. Within months, the empire's delight of mankind would be struck down, not by rebellion or war, but by a silent and inevitable force that no legion could repel. The summer of 81 CE began without warning signs of imperial tragedy. Titus remained active in public life, attending games, overseeing legal cases, and inspecting ongoing construction projects in Rome. Those close to him noticed no serious illness, though some later claimed he appeared unusually fatigued. The empire, confident in its stability, saw no reason to fear the loss of its ruler. In late August, Titus left Rome for the Sabine countryside, possibly seeking rest at his family estate near Rieti. Ancient sources differ on the reason. Some say he wished to escape the summer heat, others suggest he was investigating an outbreak of disease in the region. What is certain is that during this journey he fell suddenly and gravely ill. Fever gripped him, and his strength faded with alarming speed. Rumours spread quickly through Rome. Illness in an emperor often triggered suspicion of foul play, and in Titus's case, whispers named his younger brother Domitian as a possible beneficiary. Domitian had long harboured ambitions for the throne and was known to resent living in his brother's shadow. While no proof emerged, the timing of events fueled the speculation for centuries to come. Titus's condition worsened rapidly. He was moved to the family estate at Aquae Cutiliae, the same place where Vespasian had died 2 years earlier. Surrounded by a small circle of attendants, he struggled to speak, but according to some accounts, he made a cryptic remark: "I have made but one mistake." Historians have debated its meaning ever since. Was it a reference to trusting Domitian, to a personal failing, or to an undisclosed political decision? By early September, it was clear that the end was near. News travelled back to the capital, and the city grew tense. The Praetorian Guard remained alert, aware that a transition of power could invite opportunists. Senators gathered in cautious anticipation, knowing the next emperor would shape their fortunes. Titus's death came on September the 13th, 81 CE, at the age of 41. His reign had lasted just over 2 years, brief by imperial standards, yet rich in crises met with dignity and resolve. The official cause was given as fever, but the shadow of suspicion never entirely lifted. Some believed nature had taken its course, others whispered that Domitian had hastened his brother's end. In Rome, the announcement of his death was met with genuine mourning. Citizens who had known only cruelty or indifference from previous rulers now grieved for an emperor they called clement, generous, and humane. Public ceremonies honoured his memory, and his funeral was marked by solemnity and grandeur. The Senate, in a rare gesture of unity, voted to deify him, granting Titus a place among the gods of Rome. Temples and altars were dedicated in his name, and his image joined the pantheon of divine emperors. His short reign became a symbol of what a benevolent Rome could be, even if only for a fleeting moment. For Domitian, the throne was now his, but he inherited not only the empire, but the impossible standards set by his brother. The contrast between them would soon reshape Rome's political climate and cast Titus's memory in an even brighter light. With Titus gone, the fate of his immediate circle became a matter of political calculation. His brother Domitian, now emperor, moved quickly to secure the reins of power. Officially, he honoured Titus's memory, participating in the funeral rites and overseeing his deification. But behind the solemn ceremonies, many suspected that Domitian was more concerned with consolidating authority than preserving his brother's legacy. Titus had never produced a legitimate heir. He had one known daughter, Julia Flavia, from an earlier marriage. Under Domitian's reign, Julia remained within the imperial household, treated with favour and respect, though her life would later be shadowed by scandal. The absence of a direct male successor meant the Flavian line now rested entirely on Domitian's ability to govern and maintain stability. Those who had served closely under Titus found their positions precarious. Some, like the trusted generals from his Judean campaigns, were retained for their military value. Others, particularly those suspected of personal loyalty to Titus rather than the dynasty as a whole, were quietly reassigned or retired. The Praetorian Guard, once firmly under Titus's control, now answered solely to Domitian, and its officers were reshuffled to ensure complete allegiance. Berenice, the woman whose relationship with Titus had once stirred Rome's gossip, did not reappear in the political sphere after his death. Whether she mourned him privately or had long since accepted their separation remains unknown, but in the public record, she vanishes into obscurity. Her absence from the capital in these critical days spared her from the dangerous politics that followed. For Rome's citizens, the shift from Titus to Domitian was not immediately jarring. The public mourning was sincere, but life in the capital returned quickly to its rhythms. Bread was distributed, games reheld, and construction projects continued. Yet there was an undercurrent of unease. Titus had been warm and accessible, while Domitian's demeanour was colder, more distant, and marked by a growing suspicion of those around him. The Senate, which had enjoyed an unusual degree of cooperation under Titus, soon found itself navigating a very different ruler. Domitian was less tolerant of dissent and more inclined to centralise power in the imperial court. For those who had prospered under Titus's open style, the new regime felt restrictive and unpredictable. Julia Flavia's position in the court became increasingly complicated. As the only surviving child of Titus, she was a living reminder of the late emperor's popularity. Domitian's closeness to her, both politically and, as later rumours suggested, in ways more controversial, became a subject of speculation among Rome's whispering elite. Whether these stories were true, or the inventions of later historians, remains uncertain. In the provinces, the transition of power was smoother. Domitian confirmed governors in their posts and maintained the treaties and military arrangements set in place by his father and brother. The legions remained loyal, though the memory of Titus's charisma lingered among veterans who had served under him. The Flavian dynasty had survived the loss of its most beloved member, but its internal dynamics had shifted. Domitian now stood alone at the top, and the shadow of his brother's reign loomed over every decision he made. Titus's allies and family members had escaped immediate retribution, but the stability they enjoyed was fragile. Under Domitian's rule, the boundaries of loyalty and survival would prove far less certain than they had been during the short, golden reign of the delight of mankind. The legacy of Titus began to take shape almost immediately after his death. Domitian's decision to deify him ensured that his image would be preserved in Rome's official religion, his likeness appearing on coins, statues, and public altars. Temples dedicated to the divine Titus rose across the empire, and his name was invoked in ceremonies alongside that of Jupiter and other gods. For the common people, this was both a mark of honor and a way to keep alive the memory of a ruler they had cherished. In the Senate, his reign was remembered as a brief but shining example of imperial moderation. Senators spoke fondly of his willingness to hear their counsel and his reluctance to employ treason trials. Though political flattery often coloured such recollections, there was genuine admiration for the stability and openness he had fostered. In an age when emperors could be capricious or cruel, Titus's measured governance stood out. The provinces too retained favourable memories. In Judea, where his name remained synonymous with the destruction of the temple, the sentiment was understandably more hostile. But in much of the empire, his role in disaster relief, especially after Vesuvius and the Great Fire, was remembered as a sign of imperial responsibility at its best. Provincial leaders invoked his example when appealing for aid from Rome in later years. Domitian, however, faced a delicate balancing act. He could not openly diminish Titus's reputation without undermining the Flavian dynasty's legitimacy, yet his own style of rule contrasted sharply with his brother's. Where Titus had cultivated approachability, Domitian favoured distance. Where Titus had tolerated dissent, Domitian sought control. Over time, these differences sharpened public nostalgia for the late emperor. Historians writing under later regimes amplified this nostalgia. Suetonius and Cassius Dio, for example, painted Titus as the ideal ruler, a man whose reign, though short, embodied justice, generosity, and mercy. Such portrayals may have been exaggerated by contrast with Domitian's harsher image, but they ensured that Titus's place in the pantheon of good emperors remained secure. In the decades following his death, monuments completed during his reign became physical reminders of his time as emperor. The Colosseum, inaugurated under his watch, stood as the most visible legacy, its towering arches a symbol of Flavian grandeur. Inscriptions and dedications credited him with its completion, cementing the association between his name and one of Rome's greatest architectural triumphs. For the people of Rome, stories of Titus's compassion circulated alongside tales of his military prowess. Parents told their children of the emperor, who had said he had lost a day if he failed to do someone a kindness. Whether or not he truly uttered those words, the sentiment captured the image the populace preferred to remember. In private memory, among those who had served him closely, Titus was recalled as a man capable of both stern command and genuine warmth. Veterans of the Judean campaign spoke of his decisiveness under fire. Senators remembered his tact, and citizens remembered an emperor who had walked among them without fear. Over time, the image of Titus became less about the man himself and more about the ideal he represented, a fleeting vision of what Rome might be under a ruler who combined strength with humanity. This ideal would be invoked by later emperors, even if few would truly match it. Thus, even as Domitian ruled in his own fashion, Titus's memory became a quiet but enduring force, an unspoken standard by which his successors, willingly or not, would be measured. In the years after Domitian's rule ended, the image of Titus experienced a revival shaped by political needs and public longing for a gentler age. The Senate, eager to distance Rome from the autocracy of Domitian, looked back on Titus's reign as a model of principled leadership. Public records, speeches, and inscriptions emphasized his clemency, generosity, and sense of justice, contrasting them with the suspicion and severity that had followed. This posthumous shaping of his legacy was aided by the historians of the early 2nd century, particularly under the emperors Nerva and Trajan. Both rulers valued the image of the benevolent princeps and had reason to elevate Titus as an exemplar. Accounts of his reign often glossed over political compromises or harsh military actions, instead presenting him as a ruler without vice, a rare figure untouched by the corruption of absolute power. The Judean War, though controversial in its human cost, was reframed in Roman memory as a necessary act of imperial order. Titus's triumph became a celebrated chapter in the empire's military history, its spoils immortalized in the Arch of Titus, which still stood near the Forum. The monument's reliefs depicted the sacred treasures of the temple being carried through Rome, a visual narrative that tied his name to the might of Roman arms and the glory of conquest. In the popular imagination, Titus became a figure of almost legendary virtue. The story of his regret at losing a day without performing a kindness spread far beyond Rome, repeated in provincial towns and even in foreign courts. Whether myth or truth, it reinforced the idea of a ruler whose humanity matched his authority, a combination that appealed to a populace weary of cruelty. Over time, Titus's brief reign was remembered less for specific policies and more for its tone, a sense of stability, prosperity, and compassion. His leadership during disasters was held up as the gold standard for imperial response, cited whenever later emperors faced natural catastrophes. This selective memory allowed Rome to idealize his time on the throne, ignoring the harsher realities of imperial politics. Artists and poets of later centuries found in Titus a subject for praise, depicting him as the embodiment of the philosopher king. The simplicity of his 2-year reign lent itself to a narrative arc untroubled by the long-term complexities that tarnished other rulers. His early death, like that of a hero cut down in his prime, added a tragic note that deepened the public's affection. The contrast with Domitian's legacy only heightened the glow around Titus's memory. Where Domitian was accused of tyranny, Titus was remembered for mercy. Where Domitian inspired fear, Titus inspired love. This duality became a lasting trope in Roman political culture, shaping the way future historians judged emperors. Even centuries later, during the decline of the Western Empire, chroniclers still evoked Titus's name when lamenting the loss of virtuous leadership. His story had become a touchstone, a reminder of the potential within imperial power when tempered by humanity. Thus, through the intertwining of memory, myth, and political utility, Titus's posthumous reputation grew far beyond the reach of his brief reign. His image endured not only in marble and inscription, but in the Roman imagination itself, an emperor who, for a fleeting moment, seemed to bridge the gap between mortal ruler and ideal sovereign. Centuries after his death, the memory of Titus continued to echo across the Roman world, carried by monuments, inscriptions, and the enduring tales of his reign. The Arch of Titus remained a fixture in the Forum, its reliefs silently recounting the triumphal procession that followed the Judean War. Travellers from distant provinces paused beneath its stone span, reading the carved dedication that honoured an emperor long gone, yet still revered. Roman historians of the imperial and late antique periods cemented Titus's place among the good emperors of Rome. His name was paired with those of Augustus and Trajan when moralists sought examples of rulers who balanced authority with compassion. The brevity of his rule, far from diminishing his fame, sharpened it. He became the image of promise fulfilled too briefly, a vision of what the empire could have been had fortune allowed more time. In the provinces, statues of Titus often stood beside those of Vespasian, a reminder of the Flavian dynasty's stability after the chaos of the Year of the Four Emperors. Temples dedicated in his honour remained active for decades, and festivals marking his accession continued in some cities well into the reigns of later emperors. This provincial reverence showed that his appeal had extended beyond Rome's elite to the wider imperial populace. Yet with the passage of centuries, his image was not immune to reinterpretation. Christian writers, reflecting on the destruction of Jerusalem, often painted him as an instrument of divine will, a figure whose military victories served a larger, providential narrative. In this telling, Titus was both the destroyer of the temple and an unwitting participant in sacred history, a duality that ensured his name would never be forgotten in either pagan or Christian memory. During the Renaissance, antiquarians rediscovered his likeness in coins, busts, and inscriptions, reviving interest in his reign. Artists and humanists celebrated him as a model of virtuous leadership, contrasting his mildness with the despotism that often accompanied absolute rule. The romanticism of a ruler beloved by the people, generous to friends, and merciful to enemies resonated deeply in an age seeking examples from antiquity. Archaeological discoveries in the modern era only deepened his historical presence. The arch, weathered but standing, became a vital link to Rome's imperial grandeur. Relief fragments, inscriptions, and ruins of buildings completed under his orders allowed historians to reconstruct the reality behind the legend. A reign both pragmatic and idealistic, rooted in the needs of an empire, yet marked by genuine personal warmth. In popular culture, Titus's name still conjured images of a noble emperor cut down before his time. Playwrights, novelists, and filmmakers in later centuries drew on the drama of his life. The military triumphs, the disasters faced with courage, the sudden death, and the shadow cast by his successor. This blend of heroism, tragedy, and historical resonance kept his story alive for audiences far removed from the marble streets of ancient Rome. Ultimately, Titus's legacy endured because it was adaptable. To the Senate, he was the just ruler. To the people, the generous princeps. To later ages, the philosopher king. Each era found in him the qualities it most desired in a leader, shaping his image to meet its own ideals. Few emperors of Rome achieved such lasting and positive remembrance. And so, the story of Titus closes much as it began, at the meeting point of power and humanity. In life he was loved, in death he was revered. Across the centuries, as empires rose and fell, the Arch of Titus continued to catch the Roman sun, a silent witness to the fleeting reign of a man whose memory outlived the empire itself.